Hello everybody and happy Friday. Nina Soden here and I am ready to talk about books. So before we begin and get into Elevation by Stephen King, I want to ask you please click subscribe above. If you enjoy my videos, my book reviews, please share them with your friends to get the word out. All right, now Elevation by Stephen King. All right, so I started this book 2 days ago, finished it last night. It literally took me 2 days. It is a short read, and if you are familiar with Stephen King, which if you've been watching my reviews, I've done a few of them on Stephen King. He is my absolute favorite author of all time. This book is 146 pages, so it is teeny tiny for Stephen King. It is well, I read one review that said it was a short story. It's longer than that, but I doubt that it is 50,000 words, so probably not a novel like it says on the cover. I'm guessing it's a novella. Maybe it is 50,000 words. I don't know. The print doesn't look that small to me. But it just might be. I may just have a skewed imagination as to what 50,000 words looks like. All right, so let's get into this. I will read the inside of the jacket. It is a little bit different than the Amazon description, but here we go. Castle Rock is a small town where word gets around quickly. That's why Scott Carey wants to confide only in his friend Dr. Bob Ellis about his strange condition. He's losing weight without getting thinner, and the scales register the same whether he is in his clothes or out of them, no matter how heavy they are. Scott also has new neighbors who have opened a fine dining experience in town, although it's an experience being shunned by the locals. Deirdre McComb and her wife, Missy Donaldson, don't exactly conform to the lifestyle and the community approves of. And now Scott seems trapped in a feud with the couple over their dogs dropping their business on his lawn. Missy may be warm and friendly, but Deirdre is cold as ice. As the town prepares for its annual Thanksgiving 12K run, Scott begins to understand the prejudices the women face and tries to help. Unlikely alliances form, and the mystery of Scott's affliction brings out the best in people who have indulged the worst in themselves and others. From master storyteller Stephen King, who has always excelled at writing about real people tested by unreal situations, says the Washington Post, comes this compelling tale about finding common ground despite differences. A magical story with deep resonance for our time. Okay, so I think that the quote by the Washington Post really hits this one on the head, hits the nail on the head. Stephen King is amazing at writing real people in completely unrealistic situations, and yet you see the validity of it. You see how, yeah, this may be how they would react in those situations. And it just sucks you in. All right, so critical points. I've already talked about the fact that I'm not sure that it's long enough to necessarily be considered a novel. Probably is. I mean, why would they put novel on the cover if it wasn't? But it just feels more like a short story or a novella to me. There isn't a whole lot in terms of backstory with this one. I mean, the writing is phenomenal. It's Stephen King. Of course, it's spot on, right? I mean, that's just what he does. But the story, it takes these ordinary people and puts them into this impossible situation. Obviously, the storyline with the two women, the women that own the restaurant, very realistic situation. These two women, they're married, they moved to this small town to open this restaurant, and the community is shunning them, not because they don't like the restaurant, not because these women aren't good people, solely for the fact that they are lesbians and they are married and they are out. This happens all over the world. This happens in our backyard. I mean, it's awful, it's terrible, and it is a prejudice that needs to go away. But although that situation in this book may be very realistic, Scott Carey, his situation, not so realistic. Basically, he's losing weight at a rapid pace, starting at about 1 pound a day, all the way to 3 pounds a day. And he's a older gentleman with, you know, that beer gut, that belly, and that's not going away. He is not reducing in size. He is just shrinking in weight. Even if he wears a jacket, if he wears boots, if he throws quarters in his pockets, he weighs the same. And anything he touches weighs nothing to him, or basically weighs nothing. He stands on a scale and it doesn't matter if he's holding a 20-pound weight or not, he weighs the same. So unrealistic situation, completely something that cannot possibly happen. It is beyond the, you know, physics. It could not happen. And yet the way that Stephen King writes Scott Carey to react to this situation and to experience it feels so real. All right, so like I said, at first glance, it doesn't seem like these two storylines, these women and Scott Carey's situation, would mesh or would make sense together in any way. But in the end, everything comes out and everything comes together perfectly. I did mention briefly there's not a lot of backstory. We don't find out what brought Missy and Deirdre to town to start their restaurant, other than the fact that the restaurant was affordable in that area. We don't find out what causes Scott's sudden and unexplainable drastic weight loss. We don't even really find out what happens after he loses those final pounds. I mean, we see a little bit, but we don't really find out what happens to him. So there's not a whole lot of build. There's not a whole lot of backstory. There's not a whole lot of closure. But what we do find out, and I think what the message that I got out of this book, and whether it was the intended message or not, but the message that I got out of this book is that a single act of kindness can change everything. A single act of kindness can change everything. And I'm not going to tell you what that act of kindness was. I'm not going to give you any more details than what you got in the jacket of the book. But a single act of kindness can change everything. All right, if you want to know what that means, if you want to understand where I'm coming from with that, read the book. So the characters, there aren't a lot. There are 4 main characters, and that is Scott, of course, his friend, the doctor, Dr. Bob, and then Deirdre and Missy. And then there is Dr. Bob's wife, who is kind of a secondary character that we come to know a little, and we do see an arc, a change in her, which is wonderful. And then the other characters are just, we don't really see them very often. Little things happen here and there, they come into play, but those are our 4 main characters. We don't get a lot of backstory on them. There's not a whole lot of character development in terms of knowing really who they were. There is a little bit of that. Mostly, I would say, in Dr. Bob's wife, we see a big shift, a big change in her. And in Deirdre, we see a big shift and a big change in her. A little bit in Scott. And then Dr. Bob is more of a inquisitive character in this, and he's just there to come along for the ride. We are, as the reader with this book, kind of like coming into these characters' lives for just a brief moment. We don't know what happened before, we don't know what happens after, and it is a very small moment. We're kind of like that fly on the wall, just kind of buzzing in, seeing what we see, and then buzzing our way out. And there are times when you feel guilty for watching what's happening, for reading what's happening. But by the end, even though there is not a lot of character build, you care for these characters and you want to know that they're okay in the end. And if you're like me, you just might cry a little, which I did do. The appearance of this book is beautiful. You won't really understand it until you read all the way to the end. So read all the way to the end so you know what this means. I do have a couple of favorite quotes in here. I have 2 of them. And the first one is, not a wind, not even a high exactly, but an elevation. A sense that you had gone beyond yourself and could go further still. So he's talking here about one thing, but he's also referring to that runner's high that you get if you've ever been a runner and you run long distance. At some point, you get to that point where your body just feels like it's lifted and just it's propelling forward on its own. I used to run. I'm trying to get back into it, but I do know that runner's high experience and that elevation that he's talking about, which is amazing. All right, my next favorite quote is, gravity is the anchor that pulls us down into our graves. And he says that Faulkner maybe said this. Now, I don't know who the exact quote comes from, but I just love that quote. Gravity is the anchor that pulls us down into our graves. All right, I will leave you with this last little bit on page 141. His character says, don't you cry, this isn't a goddamn funeral. At that moment, maybe about a paragraph or so before, was when I had started to tear up. So, even Stephen King knows how to reach his readers and tell them what he knows they're doing. So I just found that very interesting that it came at that pivotal moment. All right, Elevation by Stephen King. It is a super short read. If you have not read it, go pick it up, get it in Kindle, get it in paperback, get it in hardcover, however you gotta do it, but read it. All right, again, if you like my reviews, please click subscribe, check out my latest video, and share my videos with your friends. Thank you so much. Have a great day and happy reading.